So, today, if you remember, for the last couple of weeks, we have talked about Martin Luther, we've talked about John Calvin, and as the winds of the Reformation were sweeping around the continent of Europe back in the 16th century, with Martin Luther being in Germany and Calvin being in Switzerland. Also, the Reformation was beginning to break out in Great Britain, albeit not necessarily with the same kind of commitment initially to the scriptures as it did over in Europe. Because if you remember the story, I'm sure, you remember how that King Henry VIII found himself in a predicament because his queen, Catherine of Aragon, was not producing a sire for him. And so he wanted to put her away. He wanted to divorce her, but he needed the Pope's permission. He wanted to get married to Anne Boleyn, but the Pope said, ain't going to happen. And so King Henry VIII said, oh, I'll show you. I'll start my own church. And so he broke away England from the Roman Catholic Church, and he himself actually became the official head of the church. You might remember that. And so the Church of England was born. And long story short, the Church of England did not, well, it did become Protestant, and it broke from the Roman Catholic Church. In many ways, it was still a lot like the Roman Catholic Church, with its liturgy, with its priests, with its clergy, with its vestments, that is, the robes that they wore. And so it was in serious need of reform. Thus enter the Puritans. We talk a lot about the Puritans here. The Puritans came about within the church and outside the church as a kind of renewing, Reformation kind of a movement, committed to biblical preaching and to biblical practice. The Puritans, the term was first used in about 1560, and initially it was a term of derision. It wasn't a compliment, because those who referred to them as such were referring to them as perfectionists, as precisionists, as nonconformists. Can't you just go along, right? So through the years, even though those godly men, the Puritans, sought to reform the Church of England, they often suffered greatly for it. You might remember Mary I, Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary wanted to see the church brought back into the direction of the Roman Catholic Church, and she actually caused many godly men to suffer and many to lose their life, a number of them being burned at the stake. And you remember John Fox. John Fox wrote his book, Fox's Book of Martyrs, which chronicled a lot of the suffering that occurred during that time period. Well, our preacher for today, Thomas Watson, was a Puritan. And he was born in 1620. He died in 1686, about 100 years after John Calvin. And his story starts off, as far as we're concerned this morning, it starts off when he went to Cambridge, Emmanuel College there at Cambridge. And the college at that time was a bastion for biblical study, biblical education. Well, there he got his bachelor's degree, he got his master's degree. And then in 1646, he began a 16-year pastorate at St. Stephen's, Walbrook in London. So he preached there, and he was such a popular preacher that people just loved him. They resonated with his preaching. And the church grew. In about 1647, he married Abigail Beadle, who was the daughter of John Beadle, who was another pastor of Puritan commitments. And together, Thomas and Abigail had at least 7 children in their first 13 years of marriage. That's a lot of kids. 4 of them, though, died in young age. Well, when the Act of Uniformity passed in 1662, and it sought to bring all of the Church of England, kind of more in that kind of liturgical book of prayer kind of order, very stiff. And when Watson would not go along with it, he got the boot from St. Stephen's. He had to leave. And so, but he continued to preach as he had opportunity in private. He preached in barns, he preached in private homes, he preached in the woods outside. But then when the Declaration of Indulgence took effect in 1672, that allowed for guys like Watson and others to have more of a place within the church. And so he gained a license to preach at Crosby Hall, Bishopsgate, also within London. And there people would come to hear him preach. And it was at that time, about the year 1680, that even Stephen Charnock became a part of the church there. And Watson died 6 years later in 1686. Some of the hallmarks about Watson that I might point out to you: he was incredibly biblical. He was just insightful, practical. He used very vivid illustrations, as you'll see in his preaching. Spurgeon said of him this. He said, quote, "Thomas Watson's writings and sermons are filled with sound doctrine, practical wisdom, and heart-searching application. His profound spirituality, gripping remarks, practical illustrations, and beauty of expression make him one of the most irresistible of the Puritans," end quote. He's one of my wife's favorites, guys. Terry loves Thomas Watson. He himself was, as I said, a dedicated student of God's Word. When he was there at Emmanuel College at Cambridge, he had the reputation as a student of being a scholar. He was a scholar in the midst of scholars. Just amazing. And his writings and his sermons reflect it, just biblically rich. As with pretty much all of the Puritans, he knew the Word of God. One other thing, a couple other things I might say, he was a faithful servant of the Lord, even though when he got booted from St. Stephen's, had to leave, he kept right on preaching. And even when he and his wife were going through tremendous grief, having lost kids, just kept right on going. He was a man also who was dedicated to prayer. Again, Spurgeon tells the story that on a lecture day, the learned Bishop Richardson came to hear Watson preach at St. Stephen's, and he was much pleased with his sermon, as Spurgeon recounts, but especially with his prayer after it. And he followed Watson home because he wanted to get a copy of his prayer, which he thought was written. And Watson said, "That I cannot do, can't give that to you because I don't pen my prayers. It was no studied thing, but uttered as God enabled me from the abundance of my heart and my affections." And the bishop went away just wondering, how could someone pray such a rich prayer extemporaneously? And you know, his story ends that when he was found dead, he was found in his place of prayer, in the posture of prayer. I would like to be found that way. I know I'm going to die. Let me be praying when I die. What a way to enter into glory, right? So, what a life, what an example of a believer. The sermon that I honed in on for Watson this morning is his message entitled, "A Consolation in Affliction." A consolation in affliction. And in his sermon, he preaches about finding consolation in affliction by focusing on God's kindness, God's faithfulness toward his people, and despite the sufferings which believers face, God blesses them by being their God, by causing them to grow in holiness through affliction and so forth. They're actually gifts of love from God to his people as they go through them. And his sermon, the sermon became, even though we don't know when and where it was preached, could have been at St. Stephen's before he was expelled, but it was so popular that it became an appended chapter later on in his book entitled The Great Gain of Godliness. And the sermon really comes from Psalm 119, verse 65, which reads, "You have dealt well with your servant, O Lord, according unto your word." And so Watson says, "Friends, The Psalms are the marrow of the Scriptures, and they are both for delight and for use, like rich delicacies which not only gratify the palate, but strengthen the spirits. This psalm is full of divine and spiritual matter. It was composed, if not sung, by the sweet singer of Israel, David. The words fall into two parts within this particular verse. First of all, God's kindness to David, that he dealt well with him. And secondly, David's gratefulness, his grateful acknowledgement of God's favor. You have dealt well with your servant, O Lord. And so from God's kindness to David, I want you to observe, first of all, the doctrine of this verse, that God deals well with his people. As Jacob told his brother Esau, God has dealt graciously with me. Genesis chapter 33, verse 11. God's people often fail to respond to God's love. But though they deal badly with God, God deals well with them. God's dealing well with his people arises from the intrinsic goodness of his nature. John tells us in 1 John chapter 4, verse 16 that God is love. And from this flow, all acts of royal bounty come to us. But you might ask the question, in what ways does God deal well with his people? Well, an answer, enriching them with varied mercies. His paths drop fatness, Psalm 65:11. He feeds, adopts, and crowns them. Is not this dealing well with them? But you still might object and ask, but how does God deal well with the saints when he lays his hand so heavy upon them in affliction? His pen is full of gall, and he writes bitter things against them. Asaph says within Psalm 73, verse 14, all day long I have been plagued and chastened every morning. So how then does God deal well with his people when it fares ill with them? Well, the answer, it must be held as an undoubted maxim that when the Lord severely chastises his saints, he still deals well with them. But we are ready to question this truth, aren't we? And say, as Mary did to the angel, how can this be? Therefore, let me prove to you that when it goes badly with the righteous, yet God deals well with them. First of all, when the Lord afflicts his saints, yet he deals well with them because he is their God. David was in the depths of sorrow, yet he could say the Lord was his portion, Psalm 16, verse 5. God himself is an exceedingly great reward, as he told Abraham in Genesis 15:1. He is a whole paradise of delight. He is the good in which all good is contained. And he who has God for his or her God, all their estate lies in jewels. If then God gives himself to his people by deed of gift to be their God, here is enough to compensate for all their troubles. I ask you, can God give more than himself? Secondly, when it goes badly for the godly, yet God deals well with them, because while he is inflicting evil on them, he is doing them good. That which the text renders, you have dealt well with your servant in Psalm 119. In the Hebrew, it actually reads, you have done good to your servant. And in Psalm 119, verse 71, David states, it is good for me that I have been afflicted. David does not say, it is good for me that I've been in prosperity, but that I have been afflicted. How so? Well, certainly God does his people good by affliction in a couple of specific ways. One, affliction makes the godly grow wiser. Affliction is indeed a school of wisdom. Affliction reveals pride, earthliness, unmortified passion, which could not have been believed was in their hearts, but affliction cures the eyesight to one's own self. Affliction also promotes holiness. The more the diamond is cut, the more it sparkles. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 10 indicates that God disciplines us through affliction that we might be partakers of his holiness. When prosperity makes grace rust, God scours us with affliction. And the godly are thankful for their sufferings. By the wholesome discipline of the cross, God makes them more humble and more conformed to Christ's image. The sharp frosts of affliction bring on the spring flowers of grace. Now, if God, while he is chastising us, is doing us good, then surely he deals well with us. And thirdly, when God puts his children to the school of the cross, that is, they are suffering, yet he deals well with them because he does not leave them without a promise. The Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up against it. Beloved, God knows our frame, that we are feeble and weak. Our flesh is not made of bronze, as Job 6:12 says. And the Lord will not try us above our strength. He will not lay a giant's burden upon a child's back. God will not stretch the strings of his violin too hard, lest they break. If God should strike with one hand, he will support with the other. Either he will make our yoke lighter or our faith stronger. The promise is honey at the end of the rod. And fourthly, God deals well with his people when he afflicts them because afflictions are preventative. They are preventative. In what kinds of ways, you ask? Well, one, affliction certainly prevents sin. Even the great Apostle Paul stated, to keep me from getting puffed up, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me, and to keep me from getting proud. 2 Corinthians 12:7. Prosperity, like opium, is ready to make men fall asleep in sin. God awakens them by the voice of the rod, and so prevents spiritual lethargy. Also, afflictions keep us from sin by preventing hell. We are chastened of the Lord so that we should not be condemned with the world. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 32. Does not a judge deal well with a prisoner when he lays some light penalty on him and saves his life? Is it not goodness in God then when he lays upon us light affliction and saves us from wrath to come? What is a drop of sorrow which the godly taste compared to the bottomless sea of wrath that the wicked must drink? Fifthly, when God corrects, he deals well with his people because all he does toward them is in love. Afflictions are indeed sharp arrows, but they are shot from the hand of a loving Father. In many ways, when God doesn't afflict the wicked in anger, so his hand is heaviest when it is actually lightest. Hosea chapter 4, verse 14 states, I will not punish your daughters when they commit whoredom. A father gives over, he gives over or refuses to correct a child whom he intends to disinherit. God's chastening the godly then is in love. As many as I love, I rebuke and discipline, says Revelation 3:19. Friends, when God has the look of an enemy toward us, he still has the heart of a father. When Abraham lifted up his hand to sacrifice Isaac, he loved him. Just so, when God sacrifices the comforts of his children, he loves them. Was not God the Father severe against Christ? He certainly was. Yet it was proclaimed by a voice from heaven, this is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Matthew 3:17. Well then, if God sends such love tokens to us, he deals well with us. Sixthly, God deals well with his people when he afflicts them because he regulates the stroke. I will correct you in measure, Jeremiah 46:28 says. God does not smite his children as he might. He does not stir up all his wrath. God does not make the cup as bitter as he could. He uses medicines rather than corrosives. He lays a lighter burden on when he might have laid on a heavier burden. Does God take away a child? He might take away his spirit. Does he chastise the body? He might torment the conscience. God does not correct his children as much as they have deserved. You have punished us less than our iniquities deserve, God says in Ezra 9:13. Does God make us drink a cup of wormwood? We have deserved to drink a cup of wrath. Does God cut us short? We have deserved that he should cut us off. Do the waters of affliction come up to our ankles? We have deserved to be drowned in these waters. And seventhly, when God afflicts his children, he deals well with them because he keeps them from sinning. Jesus asked the Father, I pray that you protect them from evil. John 17:15. How then does affliction keep believers from sinning? One way, of course, in affliction, the godly are kept from impatience. When the wicked are under God's black rod, they either faint or fret. Revelation 18 verse 9 says, men were scorched with great heat and blasphemed the name of God. But the godly are silent under the rod. You remember in Leviticus chapter 10 verse 3 that Aaron held his peace. It was a sore trial. Both his sons were consumed with fire. But Aaron held his peace. God's people opened their ear to hear the voice of the rod, but shut their mouth. They have not one word to say against God. Another way he keeps them from sinning is because the godly dare not use any dishonest means to deliver themselves out of trouble. Wicked men, like criminals, do not care how they get loose. They will sin themselves out of their own difficulties. The people of God, though, would rather be in the furnace to have their dross purged than to come out too soon. They will not purchase their liberty by ensnaring their consciences. Does not God thus deal well with his children in keeping them from sinning in affliction? Affliction cannot do the harm which sin does. One is like the tear in a garment, the other is like a tear in one's flesh. Affliction may deprive us of our estates, but sin deprives us of God. Eighthly, God deals well with his children in affliction because though he corrects them, he does not forsake them. Indeed, Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, Isaiah 49 verse 14. But that was wrongly said, for the Lord will not cast off forever, Lamentations 3:31. God may alter his providence, but not his purpose. How shall I give you up, O Ephraim? Hosea 11 verse 8 says. This alludes to a father who is about to disinherit his son, but when he is going to set his hand to the deed, his heart begins to stir. I am his father, and though he is a rebellious son, yet he is still a son. How shall I disinherit him? Such is the working of God's heart toward his children. Though he may give them a severe rebuke, yet he will not disinherit them from his mercy. Ninthly, God deals well with his children in affliction because though their condition should be sad, yet it is not so bad as others. The Lord puts a difference between the chastisements of the godly and the punishments of the wicked. The godly man has pain in his sickness, but the wicked man has wrath in his sickness, Ecclesiastes 5:17. The Lord shoots a single arrow at the godly, but a whole shower of arrows at the wicked. He punishes them in their body, their estate, and their conscience. A godly man has God to pity him in his sorrows, but the wicked have God to laugh at them in their miseries. The godly have Christ to pray for them in their afflictions, but the impenitent, when in torment, are shut out of Christ's prayer. As Jesus said, John 17:9, I do not pray for the world. God's people are apt to say, never did any suffer as they. But it is worse with the wicked. Their sins and sufferings meet together. And tenthly, God in affliction deals well with his children because if he takes away one comfort, he leaves more behind. God threatened Jerusalem that she would be stripped of all of her jewels and be left bare. But you who belong to God may sing of mercy and justice. In Psalm 101, verse 1, if God has fleeced your estate, he has raised you up friends. If he has taken away one of your jewels, he has left others behind. If he has plucked out one dear relation from you, he has left other sweet clusters behind, and can double your comfort in them as he did for Job. Is not this all kindness? But this is our sin. We grieve more for one loss than we are thankful for 100 mercies. Jacob was more troubled for the loss of Joseph than he was comforted with the lives of all of his other children. 11th, when God afflicts, he deals well with his people because he takes away nothing from them, but he gives them that which is better. What damage can be done to a man to lose his pennies and have gold given to him? If God takes away health, he gives holiness. If he takes away a child, he gives a Christ. Is not this better? God takes away a flower and gives a jewel. And 12thly, when God afflicts his children, he deals well with them because he gives them his divine presence. I will be with him in trouble, says Psalm 91, verse 15. God never promised us a charter of exemption from suffering, but he has promised to be with us in trouble. Better to be in prison and have God's presence than to be on a throne and lack it. God's presence gives courage. Was not Christ with the 3 Hebrew youth? Did he not go with them into the fire? As Nebuchadnezzar cried, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Daniel 3:25, my friends, he who is the second person of the Trinity was the 4th person in the furnace. And 13th, God in afflicting deals well with his children because he gives them that which makes amends for their afflictions. He drops in the oil of gladness. He makes them gather grapes from thorns. John 16, verse 20 says, your sorrow shall be turned into joy, Jesus told the disciples. We see a godly man's sufferings, but we know not what joy he feels. As we hear the roaring of the sea, but do not see the gold at the bottom. One of the reformers, Philip of Hesse, said that in his trouble he felt the divine consolations of the martyrs. And here indeed is honey out of the lion. The saints have sometimes been so sweetly enlarged that they would rather endure their afflictions than lack their comforts. As the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also abounds by Christ. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 5. Paul had his prison songs, did he not? A bird of paradise can sing in winter. God turns the bitter waters of Mara into wine. When the saints taste most of the wrath of men, they shall feel most of the love of God. Thus the Lord candies his wormwood with sugar. And 14th, when God corrects his children, he deals well with them because these afflictions or hot trials do not last long. After the clouds, the sun appears. I will punish the descendants of David because of Solomon's sin, though not forever. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 39. God will love forever, but not afflict forever. He will, before long, give his people a writ of ease. A sinner's best and a saint's worst are but very short. Affliction is called a cup. The wicked drink a sea of wrath. The godly only sip from the cup of affliction. And God will shortly say, let this cup pass away from them. Sorrow and sighing shall flee away, Isaiah 35, verse 10. As affliction has a sting to torment, so it has a wing to fly. When God puts his children to the school of the cross, he deals well with them because these afflictions lead them by the hand to heaven. By the cross, we mount up to heaven. 2 Corinthians 4:17, our light affliction works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. And upon the dark color of affliction, God lays the golden color of glory. O weeping saint, what a blessed change you shall shortly have. You shall change your pilgrimage for paradise. You shall have your wish. Are riches desirable? You shall have gates of pearl. Is honor desirable? You shall have white robes. Is pleasure desirable? You shall enter into the joy of the Lord. Oh, think what it will be to be sweetly immersed in the river of life, to bathe in the honey streams of God's love forever. Think what the beatific vision will be, to behold God. What will it be like to wear a garland made of the flowers of paradise? Think what it will be to have the soul thicker set with jewels of glory than the sky is bespangled with stars. Oh, what a compensation this will be for all a Christian's trials. A sight of this bliss will make them forget their sufferings. One sunbeam of glory will dry up all the water of their tears. Finally, as we move to a conclusion, let me make only a couple of applications. If God deals well with us when he chastises us, then it is fitting for us to cherish good thoughts of God. In adversity, we are prone to think harshly of God. This arises from pride. Such think themselves better than others and that they deserve better at God's hands, and now pride vents itself in murmuring. Oh, let us take heed of having harsh thoughts of God. The patient has no cause to think badly of the physician when he prescribes him a bitter potion, seeing it is to provide a cure. God's afflictive providences are the strokes of a father, not the wounds of an enemy. God smites that he might save. Out of the most bitter affliction, God distills his glory and our happiness. Beloved, let us think well of God. Nay, in all adverse providences, let us learn to bless God. In everything, give thanks, 1 Thessalonians 5:18. If in everything, then in affliction. And with good reason, because God deals well with us. Job blessed God in his severe affliction. The smiting of Job's body was like a striking upon a musical instrument. He sounded forth thankfulness. A gracious soul should bless God that he will take so much notice of him to visit him with the rod and is so kind as to afflict him rather than lose him. This shows a high degree of grace, not only to justify God in affliction, but to magnify him. Believers are God's temples, my friends. And where should his praises sound forth? But within temples. Amen.